He was slammed onto hot asphalt, face first, hands behind his back, while the Georgia sun poured down like punishment. No warning, no explanation, just flashing lights, barking orders, and the words, "You fit the description." His name was Raymond Ellis, a decorated veteran, a student of constitutional law. And in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was the plastic evidence bag one officer held up, like a trophy. Inside, a small packet of white powder allegedly found under his seat. Raymond's voice, calm but firm, said the only thing he could. "That wasn't there before. You searched this vehicle while I was inside the store." But body cam footage didn't show the search. It started too late, conveniently. By sundown, local news stations were spinning the headline, "Veteran Caught with Narcotics." His name, his face, broadcast across every screen in Claiborne County. No mention of his honorable discharge. No mention of the law school scholarship he'd earned through public service. Just another black man in handcuffs, booked and fingerprinted like a statistic. But there's something they didn't know about Raymond Ellis. He understood the system not just as a citizen, but as someone who had studied its weakest points. He'd trained federal personnel in risk mitigation. He'd read the fine print of federal oversight policies, and most importantly, he knew how to document everything, quietly, legally, meticulously. The police thought they'd shut a door, but what they did was open one. Behind that door, a veteran armed with nothing but truth and the law. And when this story hits its turning point, the same officers who grinned at a body cam lens will find themselves under one. Because what started as a wrongful arrest is about to ignite a full-blown civil rights investigation and expose a pattern of racial profiling, evidence tampering, and abuse of power. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about accountability. And Raymond? He doesn't want your sympathy. He wants the system to answer for what it did, on record, in court, and on camera. So watch closely, because the same man they tried to bury under false charges is about to teach them something they never learned at the academy. What real justice looks like when it's delivered by the very man they tried to silence. Before the arrest, Raymond Ellis moved through Claiborne like a ghost with credentials. Not the kind of ghost you forget, but the kind you never truly notice until it's too late. He wasn't flashy, didn't speak much. Drove a reliable four-door sedan that hadn't seen a car wash in weeks. He rented a modest apartment on the edge of town, stacked with law books, combat manuals, and legal pads scrawled with case law citations. He worked part-time at a local community center, coaching teens in self-defense and mentoring young veterans who had trouble adjusting to civilian life. But beneath the surface, he was always watching, not because he was paranoid, because he understood systems. He'd spent years inside one. Now, he was preparing to take on another. Raymond had served 2 tours in Iraq as a tactical intelligence officer. His job wasn't to fire weapons. It was to read patterns, dismantle threats, and anticipate bad decisions before they happened. His return to the States hadn't been easy. He had seen good men lose themselves in silence, become shadows in their own lives. But he didn't want to be just another name in a forgotten file. That's why, when the GI Bill offered him the chance, he took it. Law school at 36, top of his class, focused on civil liberties, constitutional rights, and, ironically, criminal procedure. Still, in Claiborne, Georgia, none of that mattered once a badge said otherwise. The weeks leading up to his arrest were ordinary on the surface, but in hindsight, they carried warnings. A traffic stop that lasted longer than it should have. A patrol car slowed down every time he parked near the university library. A convenience store clerk who asked him, "You military? You don't look like you're from around here." The kind of subtle friction that people who look like Raymond feel in their bones long before it becomes visible. What happened that day wasn't spontaneous, it was staged. Raymond had driven to the Circle 12 gas station to meet an old friend passing through town, a fellow veteran who needed help jump-starting a dead battery. The lot was half full. 2 squad cars were already parked near the side, lights off, windows cracked. Raymond noticed it, filed it mentally, but didn't flinch. He'd done nothing wrong. He walked inside to buy 2 bottles of water. Security cameras were blinking red above the entrance. Receipt in hand, he stepped outside, and that's when the shift happened. One of the officers approached slowly, the way someone might walk toward a car they'd already decided was suspicious. "Mind if we have a word?" the cop asked, hand already resting near his belt. Raymond didn't resist. He knew better than to argue on the curb. The second officer circled around to the passenger side. "We got a call about a suspicious vehicle. Yours matches the description." Description of what? They didn't say. But within minutes, they had him standing outside while one of them opened his back door and pretended to be securing the vehicle. Raymond knew the drill, but something felt off. Too rehearsed. Too clean. Then came the discovery. The so-called evidence. A small plastic bag was tucked under the rear floor mat. White powder. The officer held it up like he'd found gold. Raymond's breath didn't quicken. His hands didn't shake. He simply stared and said, "That wasn't in my car." The officers exchanged a look, the kind that only makes sense when a lie has already been rehearsed. They arrested him on the spot. At the station, they booked him without hesitation, printed the charges, possession with intent to distribute a controlled substance. The phrase alone is a death sentence in a town like Claiborne, especially when it's paired with a mugshot and a few lazy assumptions. Within an hour, Raymond's face was on every local news website. The article didn't mention his military service, didn't mention he was 1 semester from graduating from law school. It didn't have to. The narrative was already locked in place. Black man, drugs, arrest, clickbait. Raymond made his phone call. Not to a lawyer, not to his family, but to a professor at his law school. Someone who had once told him, "One day, you're going to need the system to defend you. Make sure you've studied it better than anyone else." He had. Every procedural flaw, every evidentiary rule, every local ordinance. He didn't panic. He requested to represent himself at arraignment. The judge looked surprised, but allowed it. Raymond kept his voice low, deliberate, and composed. He didn't ask for special treatment. He asked for the footage. The body cam footage, patrol car footage, store surveillance, anything that could reconstruct those critical 3 minutes outside Circle 12. But the DA's office responded with a formal letter. Due to technical malfunction, video from the officer's body-worn cameras was not properly captured. No dash cam from the cruiser. No interior store footage. Camera was under maintenance. Just an arrest report and a field test that came back presumptive positive. That phrase again. Presumptive, not verified, not tested by a lab. Raymond was released on bond but suspended from law school pending a review. Suddenly, his inbox was silent. Friends he'd studied with didn't respond. Even veterans he had helped avoid eviction, addiction, or worse, now treated him like he was already guilty. One told him, "I want to believe you, man, but I don't want to get dragged into anything." Another simply unfollowed him and never explained why. But Raymond didn't care about sympathy. He cared about patterns. And something about the way the charges were filed, the speed of the press coverage, and the sudden silence from the store where it happened felt too coordinated to be a coincidence. So he went back to what he knew best. He started building a case. Not for his innocence. He already knew he'd win that. He started building a case against them. The first place he went wasn't a courthouse. It was the gas station. Raymond parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, cap pulled low. He wasn't there to argue. He just wanted to know who controlled the camera system. Inside, the same clerk who had rung him up days earlier stood behind the counter. Young, maybe 22, name tag said Tommy. Raymond offered a simple greeting, a gentle tone. "Your security cameras, do they record to the cloud or just local?" Tommy's smile stiffened. "Store owner handles that," he replied too quickly. "I don't mess with the tech stuff." Raymond nodded, thanked him, and walked out. But as he turned the corner of the building, he glanced back through the window, and caught Tommy already on the phone, face tight, whispering. That's when he knew. Someone didn't want that footage found. And if someone was scared enough to make that call, it meant the truth was on tape. Or had been. He didn't chase the footage that day. Instead, he started researching Claiborne PD's recent arrests, specifically ones involving black men under 35 and any case mentioning drug possession near a business. He found 7, the same arresting officer in 5 of them, Sergeant Kyle Becker, the same man who held up the plastic baggie beside his car. Becker's name appeared in multiple incident reports, often alongside phrases like anonymous tip, routine patrol, or suspicious behavior near storefront. But most alarming was this. All 5 cases involved malfunctioning body cams or missing video. No hard footage, only affidavits. It was a pattern, one you only notice when you know what to look for. And Raymond had spent years learning just that. Criminal justice reform, police accountability, evidence chain of custody, those weren't just concepts he studied for exams. They were now personal, tangible, and they were failing. He created a private document, a case matrix. Names, dates, arrest locations, charges, video anomalies, and trial outcomes, all cross-referenced. It wasn't just about proving his own innocence anymore. Something was rotten, and if he didn't shine light on it, no one else would. The next move was delicate. He contacted someone he hadn't spoken to in years, Marlon Pace, a former Army buddy now working as a data analyst for a federal agency. Not FBI, not DEA, something in between. Their last conversation had been over drinks in D.C., arguing about surveillance laws. Raymond called in the favor. I need to know who deleted security footage from a private retail server, he said. And when. Marlon didn't ask why. He just sighed. Send me what you've got. 3 days later, Marlon called back, his voice flat. The deletion came from an IP address registered to a mobile hotspot, activated by Becker's patrol car the day of your arrest. It was the confirmation he needed. A police officer had deliberately accessed and wiped third-party footage. That wasn't sloppiness. That was evidence tampering. Raymond had enough for a motion to dismiss, but that wasn't enough for him. He wanted exposure. He filed a formal complaint with the Claiborne Internal Affairs Division, carefully attaching the case matrix, the IP log, and a written testimony stating his own chain of events. He expected resistance. What he didn't expect was silence. 2 weeks passed. No call, no email, just silence. Then came the chilling part. One night, after leaving the law library, he found his car door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing stolen, just his glove box wide open and a single sticky note taped to his dashboard. You're not the only one who knows how to track things. No signature, no fingerprints, just intent. It didn't scare him, it confirmed he was close. But Claiborne had another move. The next day, Tommy, the gas station clerk, was arrested. Charges: possession of cannabis, intent to distribute. The amount? 3 grams. Barely enough to press charges, let alone hold without bail. Yet Tommy was denied release due to risk of interference in an active investigation. Raymond knew the play. Witness suppression. He didn't go to Internal Affairs again. He went higher. Using the Freedom of Information Act, he submitted a request to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation for all open complaints against Sergeant Becker in the last 18 months. He cross-checked every case, including the ones Becker had testified in. 4 of them had ended in plea deals. No trial, no video evidence, just fast convictions. No one had fought back. No one had the resources, until now. Raymond quietly reached out to a civil rights attorney based in Atlanta, a woman named Talia Monroe, who had once argued a wrongful arrest case all the way to the 11th Circuit. He showed her the matrix, the IP logs, the behavioral pattern of Becker's anonymous tips, and the unexplained gaps in footage. Talia read in silence for 10 minutes, then looked up and said, You're not just building a defense. You're building a federal case. She took the file, pro bono. Raymond didn't tell anyone. He kept showing up to court dates, kept meeting with school officials about his suspension, kept his face neutral when someone at the grocery store whispered, "That's the guy from the drug bust." He let the silence thicken around him. Because silence made noise when it broke. And it was about to. It started with a letter. A printed envelope slid under Raymond's door late one evening. No stamp, no return address, just his name typed in block letters. Inside was a single page. No greeting, no threats. Just a line of text. "You weren't the first. Look into Darnell case number 417713. That was it. Raymond sat down with a legal pad and started digging. Case number 417713, 6 months prior. Defendant, Darnell Williams, age 23, arrested 2 blocks from where Raymond had been taken. Charged with possession with intent. Same arresting officer, Sergeant Kyle Becker. Same excuse. Anonymous tip. Same failure to produce full body cam footage due to technical failure. Darnell had no lawyer, no chance. Took a plea deal. 6 years. But here's what no one expected. Raymond found the original discovery request from the case, inside the digital court archive, and buried in it was a time-stamped photo from the arrest scene meant to show the seized contraband. What caught Raymond's eye wasn't the evidence, but the background. The door of Becker's patrol car was open, and clearly visible was a police-issued mobile Wi-Fi hotspot device resting on the seat, the same kind that Marlin had traced back to the server breach at the gas station. Suddenly, it wasn't just about Raymond. It was a pattern, and he could prove it. The next morning, he drove 2 hours to the prison where Darnell was serving time. With Talia Monroe's help, he submitted a legal visit request, citing ongoing litigation. Darnell walked into the interview room with heavy eyes and calloused hands. Raymond didn't waste time. "Do you remember what happened that night? Everything?" Darnell nodded slowly, then said, "I told them I didn't have anything. They searched my car before I even got out. But when I said that in court, my lawyer said it wouldn't help." Raymond showed him the case matrix, then the photo, then the IP trace. Darnell stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "I knew it wasn't right. I just didn't think anyone would ever care." Raymond left that room with a signed affidavit and a new fire in his chest. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was reopening a wound this department had tried to seal with time and silence. The next domino dropped 2 days later. The local news channel, WCTV7, ran a late-night piece based on new developments in the arrest of veteran Raymond Ellis. Someone had leaked a portion of the discovery file, including the missing surveillance timestamps and Becker's contradictory statements. It was enough to get people talking, but not enough to trigger action. Yet. Raymond knew the department would react. And they did. 2 nights later, while leaving the community center where he still volunteered, Raymond noticed a dark SUV idling across the street. It wasn't from the department fleet. He'd memorized those plates. This one was tinted deep, silent, watching. When he stepped into his car and pulled out, the SUV followed at a distance, not tailing, hovering. A silent message. But Raymond didn't flinch. He went home, turned off the lights, and typed a letter, this time addressed to the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. He included the pattern of missing footage, the IP breach, the suppressed witness, Tommy, the intimidation tactics, and now, the wrongful incarceration of Darnell Williams with visual proof. It was a civil rights violation in clear daylight. He mailed it certified, then backed up every file he had onto 3 separate encrypted drives, one for Talia, one for the press, and one he hid inside a hollowed-out law book titled Federal Rules of Evidence. The next pressure point came from inside the house. Raymond's law school, under pressure from both faculty and student advocacy groups, announced an emergency hearing regarding his suspension. The dean's office, after weeks of silence, sent him an official invite to present his case in person. "New evidence has come to light," the letter read. In that hearing room, seated under fluorescent lights and framed certificates, Raymond stood alone at the podium, calm, composed, methodical. He didn't plead, he presented. He walked them through each incident, each chain of custody violation, each falsified detail. Then he showed them Darnell's affidavit, and finally, the original timestamp from the gas station camera before it was wiped. A professor leaned forward and asked, "Mr. Ellis, are you suggesting this was all deliberate?" Raymond's answer was surgical. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating, with evidence, that a pattern of systemic misconduct, evidence tampering, and racially motivated targeting has gone unchecked in Claiborne PD, and I was one of many." The room fell quiet for a long time. Then came the vote. Unanimous, his suspension was lifted. But the real storm hadn't even started. Because that night, as Raymond walked out of the building, phone buzzing with messages of support, his inbox lit up with a new notification, a burner email. No name, just an attachment. Video.mp4. He tapped play. And everything changed. The video was grainy at first, shot from what looked like a dash-mounted surveillance system, time-stamped exactly 1 hour before Raymond's arrest. It showed Becker's patrol car pulling up to the gas station. No lights, no sirens. Just a quiet roll in. He stepped out, looked around, then opened the rear door of Raymond's parked car, using a spare key. That was the first shock. The second came 30 seconds later. From his jacket, Becker pulled a small, clear bag, the same size and type used for evidence. He slipped it under the rear seat, patted the cushion like a man setting bait, and walked away without looking back. The file ended there. No watermark, no edit cuts. Just pure, damning video evidence of a setup. Raymond watched it again, then a third time. Someone had been watching that night, not just the gas station cameras, but another silent observer. And now, they'd passed the torch. Whether it was an ally or a whistleblower, Raymond didn't know, but the message was clear. You were never crazy. They just wanted you to doubt your own memory. He immediately sent the video to Talia. 10 minutes later, she called. "Raymond, if we move now, we don't just get your charges dropped. We light a match the state can't put out." She contacted media outlets, civil rights organizations, filed an emergency motion with the county court, and submitted the footage directly to the DOJ with the subject line. Pattern of corruption. Urgent federal review required. That same night, WCTV7 broke the story. Body cam footage leaked. Veteran was framed. Video shows officer planting drugs. The clip hit Twitter, then national news. Overnight, Raymond Ellis trended beside hashtags like #JusticeForVeterans, #EndQualifiedImmunity, and #PoliceAccountabilityNow. By morning, the mayor's office issued a public statement calling the footage disturbing and unacceptable. Within hours, Claiborne PD placed Sergeant Becker on administrative leave, but it was too late to contain. Civil rights lawyers flooded the town. National organizations pledged support. A federal oversight task force arrived within 72 hours to begin a formal investigation of the department's practices. And Raymond? He kept moving. He drove straight to the prison again, this time not as a legal visitor, but as a man with leverage. He met with Darnell, handed him a flash drive, and said, "Your story's coming out." Then he contacted the families of the other names on the matrix. Every young man who had signed a plea deal under the weight of Becker's reports. Some cried, some cursed. One simply whispered, "I knew I wasn't crazy." Each of their stories added fuel to the fire. Raymond compiled them into an official civil rights lawsuit, a class action case that named not only Becker, but the department's leadership for willful negligence, racial profiling, and suppression of exculpatory evidence. The language was airtight. The intent was crystal. But there was still one piece left. Becker had gone silent. No statements, no public comments. Rumors swirled that he'd left town, that he'd been placed in protective custody, that he'd lawyered up. But Raymond didn't care about retribution. He cared about what Becker knew, because corruption like this never operated in a vacuum. Someone else had to have signed off. Someone higher. The break came from an unlikely place. A young officer, fresh out of academy, emailed Raymond anonymously, said she'd been ordered not to wear her body cam on certain patrols, that evidence lockers were often opened without secondary sign-off, that during the week of Raymond's arrest, she overheard Becker in the locker room say, "The law student's gonna wish he stuck to books." That message became affidavit number 8. Then affidavit number 9 came from a former dispatcher who admitted 911 calls were sometimes rerouted to avoid formal logging, especially tips used to justify traffic stops. The dam had burst. Under pressure from both the DOJ and national media, the Claiborne police chief resigned. 2 lieutenants were suspended. Becker was arrested, charged not only with evidence tampering, but conspiracy to violate civil rights under federal statute. His bond was denied. Raymond stood outside the courthouse that day, not to gloat, not to perform, but to remind everyone watching what this had been about all along. Not revenge. Truth. Reporters swarmed. One asked, "Mr. Ellis, do you feel vindicated?" His answer was firm. "No one wins when a system has to be shamed into doing its job. But if this stops even one more kid from being framed, then it's worth it." And with that, he walked away, quiet as always. But this time, the whole world followed. The courtroom may have silenced Becker, but Raymond knew better than to mistake one fallen badge for full accountability. Systems this calculated don't crumble from a single arrest. They shift, they hide, they protect their roots, and that's exactly what he suspected was happening now. Because just as momentum seemed to be peaking, with national media covering the case daily, the DOJ launching a civil rights investigation, and legal experts hailing Raymond's lawsuit as a potential landmark in law enforcement reform, a quiet, chilling pause swept through the institutions around him. The mayor canceled public appearances, the interim police chief refused interviews, and Raymond's federal inquiries, especially about internal oversight and training protocols, were suddenly met with automated delays or vague denials. Then, an anonymous email arrived. One line again, one file. Subject: "This goes deeper than Becker." Attached, a scanned page from a police department performance review, signed 2 years earlier by the former police chief Clarence Dugan. It was a summary of an experimental enforcement strategy aimed at reducing recidivism by discouraging repeat contact with law enforcement in high crime zones. The document listed approved tactics, among them, proactive deterrence through strategic evidence flagging. Flagging. Raymond stared at the word like it had teeth. It wasn't policy. It was camouflage for evidence planting. An unspoken system of ghost rules disguised as strategy. And Becker hadn't created it. He was following it, executing something older, more institutional. And now, with this document, Raymond had a direct link to the top. Clarence Dugan had retired shortly before Raymond's arrest, moved to a gated neighborhood outside Atlanta, but his name still carried weight in Georgia law enforcement circles. A reformer, some said. A results-driven innovator. The kind of man who gave speeches at state conferences about restoring public trust while signing off on memos that subverted it. Raymond knew confronting Dugan through legal channels would trigger cover-ups. He needed a smarter angle. He called Marlin, his friend in federal data systems. "Can you pull anything on Dugan's retirement records? Anything odd?" Marlin hesitated. "Ray, that man's got friends, real ones, the kind who burn logs, not files." But an hour later, Marlin called back. "Found something. A digital purchase trail, an encrypted laptop, military grade, bought 2 weeks before he stepped down. That's not standard for retirees." Raymond's eyes narrowed. "What's the delivery address?" It wasn't to his listed home. It was to a private law firm downtown. A firm that, coincidentally, had just filed a motion to suppress Raymond's entire body of evidence in the civil suit on the grounds that unauthorized digital surveillance had tainted the chain of custody. Dugan wasn't hiding. He was preparing to strike back, quietly, legally, and with corporate muscle. Raymond knew what this meant. He wasn't just up against a department anymore. He was up against the blueprint behind it. The infrastructure of systemic racism is disguised as policy. The retired chiefs, the legal consultants, the insurance lawyers are protecting officers with taxpayer-backed defense funds, the kind of architecture that outlives elections and headlines. He turned to Talia. "We go federal all the way. No state court, no local bias." Talia nodded. "We'll bring the strategy itself to trial, not just the man." And that changed everything. They amended the lawsuit, no longer just a wrongful arrest. Now it is alleged that patterned civil rights violations, under the color of law doctrine, are tied to official policy-level misconduct. That upgrade meant one thing. The case could now qualify for federal jurisdiction and civil penalties under Section 1983. The moment the suit was refiled, the temperature changed. Dugan's legal team tried to settle quietly, offered Raymond a lump sum, mid-six figures, with a strict non-disclosure agreement. No trial, no testimony, no precedent, just silence. Raymond declined and leaked the offer to the press. The story exploded again. Retired police chief offers settlement to avoid testimony in veteran civil rights case. That headline did more damage to Dugan's legacy than any verdict ever could. Within hours, civil rights groups doubled down. A federal watchdog organization filed its own ethics complaint, and a whistleblower from inside the firm, tired of seeing files marked containment priority, forwarded Raymond an internal memo. Minimize Ellis, do not allow policy precedent, target procedural error. Translation: discredit him. Undermine the integrity of his case. Paint him as sloppy, arrogant, a veteran who got lucky, not a man who outsmarted an empire. But they underestimated something again. Raymond wasn't just defending himself. He had studied their playbook better than they had studied him. Raymond knew what they were trying to do. Do not defeat him, not even silence him, just exhaust him, financially, emotionally, legally, until the edges of his truth blurred into just another case. It's the oldest trick in systemic power. Let justice die not with force, but with delay. But this time, the clock wasn't theirs. He struck first. In coordination with a federal oversight committee now shadowing the case, Talia filed a motion to compel discovery, but not just against Becker or the local PD. She demanded Dugan's laptop, the encrypted one. The firm fought back, arguing attorney-client privilege. But Talia cited a narrow window. If the content contained evidence of active criminal conspiracy, privilege was void. The judge allowed a sealed review. What they found cracked the case wide open. Inside were folders labeled Predictive Zone Enforcement Strategy Alpha. Inside those, internal memos, training slide decks, and data models identifying high-friction suspects, code for young black men with minor prior offenses, family members with criminal records, or any connection to anti-police sentiment online. Worse, the files revealed this strategy had been sold to over a dozen small departments across the state. Claiborne was just one node in a wider machine. This wasn't a rogue cop. This was a for-profit policing algorithm wrapped in reform language and deployed like a virus. And Dugan? He'd licensed it after retiring, earning private income by teaching cities how to target legally without calling it targeting. Raymond didn't say a word to the press. Instead, he let the court transcript speak for him. In a federal hearing held in Atlanta, Dugan was called to testify. He arrived in a tailored gray suit, practiced calm, but the moment the judge admitted the sealed evidence, his posture broke. He refused to answer certain questions, invoked privilege, dodged. But then came the moment that flipped the courtroom. Talia handed the judge a signed affidavit, new, freshly notarized. It was from a whistleblower inside Dugan's firm, a former junior analyst who had helped design the enforcement matrix. Her testimony, She was instructed to filter out any names flagged as white or affluent, regardless of behavior metrics. She quit after 6 months. That document landed like thunder. The judge's response was swift. He ordered a formal referral to the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division for criminal review. The class action suit would move forward with expanded jurisdiction. Suddenly, every city that bought Dugan's strategy had a potential civil liability bomb ticking under it. Raymond had done what most thought impossible. He hadn't just cleared his name. He'd exposed the invisible machine behind his arrest. A machine that wore suits, signed contracts, and called itself reform while secretly trading on racial bias. And he'd done it without a badge, without a gun, without shouting. Just law. Within weeks, the DOJ launched formal investigations into 5 other departments tied to Strategy Alpha. News anchors began calling it a digital redlining scandal. Civil rights organizations demanded hearings. Congressional members weighed in. But Raymond? He stayed quiet. Until the press finally caught him outside the courthouse, and one reporter asked the question everyone was thinking. You've now helped expose the biggest coordinated racial profiling model in Georgia law enforcement history. What do you want next? He looked into the camera, calm as ever, and said, I want systems to fear silence. Because when a man like me stays quiet, it's not surrender. It's strategy. He walked away, letting the weight of the truth do the talking. And behind him, the walls that had once tried to cage him finally began to crack. 6 months after the ruling, Raymond Ellis stood in the same courtroom, not as a defendant, not even as a plaintiff, but as a keynote speaker at a legal symposium on systemic bias and constitutional rights. The audience was packed with young lawyers, veterans, civil rights advocates, and federal officials. His name was now in case law. His story had been cited in classrooms, reviewed in think tanks, and dissected on legal podcasts across the country. But he didn't come to be celebrated. He came to say something most people in power still weren't ready to hear. He adjusted the mic and began, not with legal language, but with memory. I didn't win because I'm smarter. I didn't win because I'm a veteran. I won because I refused to forget what they hoped I'd internalize, that silence is safer than truth. He paused, letting the room breathe. When they planted evidence in my car, it wasn't just to jail me. It was to brand me. To mark me as disposable in a system that's trained to trust uniforms more than lived experience. But what they didn't know, what systems like this always forget, is that people like me don't go away quietly. We learn, we adapt, we build proof. There was no applause, just stillness, the kind that means people are listening. He spoke of laws, not as abstract ideals, but as shields people like him had to learn to wield, because no one else would do it for them. He broke down how qualified immunity had shielded bad officers for decades, how civil litigation was often the only path for accountability, and how racial disparities in policing weren't glitches. They were coded in by design. But the most powerful moment came when he closed with a truth too large for courtrooms. My uniform didn't protect me. My service didn't protect me. What protected me, what saved me, was documentation. Paper trails, digital receipts, body cam footage, witness statements, and the sheer refusal to let anyone else narrate my story for me. And then he looked directly into the crowd, his voice low but undeniable. This country has a long habit of underestimating quiet men, veterans, black men, men who don't raise their voice in protest, but raise their pen in preparation. You want to reform the system? Don't just defund injustice. Outthink it, outwrite it, outlast it. The room erupted, not in noise, but in standing silence. That rare kind of still respect. The kind you don't cheer for. You carry it with you when you leave. Outside that courthouse, Raymond didn't pose for interviews. He didn't sign autographs. He walked out into the sunlight like he always had, head level, shoulders even, no need to prove anything to anyone. Because in the end, justice hadn't arrived with sirens. It had arrived the same way he had. Prepared, precise, unapologetically legal. And the system that tried to erase him? It would now carry his name forever, carved into its correction.